Welcome to Directionally Correct, a Beeplings podcast with Cole and Scott.
Today's guest, Fred Oswald.
Thanks to our sponsors, Worklytics. Generate actionable insights from work data while protecting your privacy using workplace analytics with our partners, Worklytics. So, Fred, do you know Scott?
Maybe I should. Is that the lead in here?
Well, I think everyone should, right? No, actually, it was rather an embarrassing moment. I met you at, I think, IPAC in Atlanta. This is like 10 years ago.
Okay.
It was in the hospitality suite, and they had like free alcohol, and I was a grad student, and that's awesome. How you gonna turn that down as a grad student? And I remember talking to you, and I was like, oh man, I probably should not have done that. But it's nice to reconnect, definitely.
Yeah, likewise. I see your Zoom name here says Scotty, so maybe I'll call you Scotty.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's kind of a running joke. That's how you know you're part of the inner circle. So you've already made it to the inner realm.
Yeah, very good. Your friendly side is showing here on Zoom, Scotty.
Well, Fred, I actually probably have an equally forgettable way that we met as well, which I don't think you know about either. We met when I was in graduate school as well, but it was on an airplane. Do you remember this?
Go on, please.
So it was this shows how stupid I was at the time. I'm sitting next to you on an airplane, and I think you saw like something that I had like in my hand or something that indicated IO psychology, and you were like, "Oh, what's that?" And of course, I'm like dreading this moment because now I had to explain what IO psychology is to a stranger. And little did I know, it's like Fred Oswald is sitting next to me on this plane, but I'm trying to explain what IO psychology is to Fred Oswald like an idiot. And luckily,
I didn't even ask you to stop, right? I made you go through the pains.
No, you made me get all the way through it. Luckily, there was actually another guy on the other side of me who was also an IO psychologist on the way to PsyOp who bailed me out. And then you guys had a good conversation, and I just sat there like, oh my God, I'm so stupid, like the rest of the flight.
No, you gotta start somewhere, and you know what? We're all still figuring things out, aren't we? As we'll talk about today.
I still haven't figured it out. I have not figured out how to talk about IO psychology to strangers, and to this day.
Well, maybe that was what Fred was doing. Like, it's great to hear other people explain their opinion of what IO psychology constitutes. My mother still calls it, I do the I and the O. So, I mean, that's a basis.
My parents, even in a Christmas card one time, they said Cole is very involved in PsyOp, but they spelled it like psychological operations, like psyops that the military does in other countries. And I was like, wow, people think I'm in like the CIA or something.
You could be very involved in that.
Probably, but it's not necessarily something that's desirable, I would say. Going into countries and destabilizing their governments and stuff. Yeah, I don't think I'm too keen on that.
Yeah, I gotta say, my parents never really knew, or my mom passed away. My dad's still alive. They don't really know what I do, but I think to your point, Scotty, it's a skill to be able to explain what we do to friends, family, and those who we should connect with.
Well, I mean, like from a I guess like the starting point, how do you describe IO to other folks? If you were sitting on a plane next to Cole, like how would you explain IO?
Yeah. Well, like a good professor.
The tables have turned.
I'll say, I would say it depends, nice. Kind of get a feel for where they're coming from, because I think you can connect at the level of workforce. It could be that, most people have jobs who are adults or know what jobs are, it turns out. And so being able to relate at their own level to get the conversation started around jobs, and then, well, what aspects, I study the workplace, and maybe they'll talk about, coworkers or their boss, or I'll then ease into how I look at, the job applications and the process of selection. So maybe that's not a definition. more of a conversation so that they get a real, a glimpse into what, we would call them critical incidents, are for our field. What things do we do actually?
Well, I think that's totally apt. Like to your point, like everyone has a job, everyone derives some sort of meaning from their job in some capacity, and it's very broad. Whether you want to go into selection or if you want to go into psyops for the government, there's a room for everybody. And
that's right. There's even room for psyops, but there's also room for psyop. For those who may appear really interested, we could refer them to the PSYOP website and explore what's on there, and even go to the program for the conference to see what's on people's minds recently and what they're presenting at the conference and so on.
Yeah, well, that's actually probably a good point to introduce you, Fred. So I want, because you have been a previous president of PSYOP, or the Society of IO Psychologists, back in 2017 and 2018. You're also a professor of IO psychology at Rice University, amongst many, many other accolades that we'll probably spend the rest of the podcast talking about. But one of which I'm really excited about is you're the current associate editor of the JAP, as we sometimes call it, the Journal of Applied Psychology, which is the premier journal in our field. So I'm just super honored to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, hey, the feeling is quite mutual, guys. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Let's not talk about accolades. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but let's talk about the good stuff.
Absolutely.
Tell me what's on the agenda.
Well, one thing I wanted to talk to you about today, which I guess is another one of your accolades, I guess we could call it, is you're on a committee that is you could probably say the name of what it is, but that's looking at AI from a governmental lens. And one of the things we wanted to talk to you today was about, some of the impacts that AI is going to be having on the future of IO psychology and people analytics. And I know there have been some revelations that we've gone through recently, but do you mind talking at all about this special position that you have?
Sure. So I'm a member of the National Artificial Intelligence Advisory Committee. We advise the president and the Secretary of Commerce. I can't say I've met Joe Biden at all, let alone recently. But our report was just released at the end of April. I guess the official stamp maybe was later in May, but basically that was our year one report. So 1 year of activity where we laid out infrastructure for AI along the kind of buckets of international AI. So, US working with other countries on policy and innovations, business. Also AI and the workforce, internally, what are some issues we can promote there? Trustworthy AI. So a real push behind the initiative in the first place was the fact we need to develop trust in AI at all levels and preserve individual rights and civil liberties. And of course, with that comes the perennial concern and appropriately concern about bias across various subgroups that are already vulnerable in the world. And so it's very wide-ranging, very, very sweeping report, but focused on the federal level with the idea that, we are advising President Secretary of Commerce, so focus on federal work and then, see where that goes in terms of corporate stuff going on outside the government. I'm obliged to say that none of my opinions today are as in representing NIAC. I am me wherever I go. So all my opinions here are my own. But what was interesting about the group, I guess like any group of diverse range of people, you look at each other and you say, who are you? And they say, who are you? And you get to talking and figure out where you're coming from and where your complementary sources of expertise are. So as you all know, my area focuses on workforce and in personnel selection in particular, but other folks focus in areas such as the ethics of AI. So folks who even represent companies or actually run companies that do ethical AI. There's your Silicon Valley types in the world, right? Your Amazons and Microsofts and so on. And then there's legal and kind of policymakers, people who are very familiar, but certainly more comfortable with how things run the federal government than others like myself. And then other academics, so computer scientists, we have a sort of a philosopher / cognitive scientist. I think he would call himself a philosopher. So anyway, a real mix of folks where we're looking at each other, trying to figure out where our sources of expertise are, and then coming together around these subgroups that I mentioned to generate something in a very quick time, right? You have to figure each other out. Absolutely. And generate a report and do it quick and try to do something pretty impactful to, in terms of sending a signal of what you're trying to do, but also given administrative changes, even if, you know, when you're in an election cycle, no matter who wins an election, you're in that cycle. And so that might slow things down. So no sooner did we release the report in DC than we went to the basement of the hotel we were staying at and start working on year 2. So now, you know, I'm in the year 2 group on workforce and working on actual group on procurement. So the idea of how do you order AI for the federal government, you know, you get a box of AI on your doorstep. How do you use it, implement it? You know, what are some, at least the part I'm interested in, which I think about in other arenas, is how should a discerning consumer, like an organization, think about AI? What questions should they ask? Whether it's selection tools or you know, which I focus on, but something else too, like exoskeletons or you know, your hybrid robot, your new coworker is coming out of the box.
Maybe we can start right there. Like, you know, one of the most robust findings in IO is mechanical judgment is superior to individual, you know, subjective judgment, and AI would be a natural extension of that. But of course, there's hesitancy and bias, as you mentioned previously. What areas is AI most applicable to in IO, and where should we kind of like back off and take a moment?
Great question. You know, since I wear my IO lenses everywhere I go, I think everything is relevant to what we do. But you bring a good question that some areas are more relevant than others. And even within IO, you know, I don't claim to be an expert in organizational change, right? Or, you know, leadership.
Is anyone?
You know?
I mean, really?
well, there's that. But you know, it does in those areas and others. Another job of committee members is to refer folks to experts to present to the committee or to share materials. So behind everyone's backs, I've been letting them know about our expertise and sharing where there are resources if they would like them on a variety of topics. And so I mean, it's a true privilege to be on the committee, and it's you know, a real pleasure to be able to make those connections. I have enough gray hairs, what remains on my head, to know people, you know, that I wouldn't have known when I started, and so that helps me make those connections to inform what the committee is up to. But yeah, we have our strengths and we have our weaknesses, right? And so I don't pitch in on topics where I have nothing to say, and there are plenty of those. But then when something comes right up my alley, then I, you know, I'll do something. And actually, this was going back to the first point about us talking with each other and figuring out our expertise. I honestly wondered, where would I be able to contribute and make a difference? But sure enough, even in year one, when we talk about workforce issues and data and what government data are available in the ONED and Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Labor type data, I have something to say about that. That kind of thing.
Well, I definitely think it transforms what we're doing with PSYOP as well, because I saw you were a part of this committee. I don't know if committee is the right word, but they put together the considerations and recommendations for validation and use of AI-based assessments for employee selection. And I think you were a part of that group. I'm sure what you're doing with the government probably was a helpful transition there, because I mean, you and a few other like key name folks like Dan Putka and Richard Landers and a few others published an article that we've talked about a few times on the podcast about evaluating NLP approaches to estimating KSAs and interest in job analysis ratings. Maybe the future of job analysis is completely automated using AI and these type of things, but there's outstanding questions about how would you do that while maintaining the scientific rigor, while not instituting bias that shouldn't exist in the process, while maintaining our standards for validation and the like. I don't know, would you like to talk about that at all, Fred?
Sure, yeah. Indeed, I was a member of this committee that was providing some recommendations that follow on to the PSYOP principles for validation use personnel selection. We were thinking about in the AI era, what reminders, what extensions do we need to give our IO audiences when they deal with AI-based tools? And in a lot of ways, we were, despite the length of the document, we were reiterating some of the principles that were in there. It almost like part of it was, hey folks, go back to the principles and let's remember our principles. Let's remember our principles and principles about reliability, validity, and fairness, and what those mean, and hold on to those tightly and dearly, maybe even more tightly in the age of AI, where algorithms are opaque and technologies may give you messy data to which you're applying those opaque algorithms. So it really is a different world. But at the same time, the document contains some new considerations because, as one example, differential prediction, if you see whether a measure is more valid for one group versus another, that amounts to differences in regression line slopes, for instance, between groups. And I'll put aside issues of reliability and range restriction and stuff like that we think about. Those are clearly important.
Which is a whole nother debate we've had on the podcast too.
Yeah. Okay. Definitely, those are important issues. But focusing on the core of just the concept of measures behaving differently for different groups. So it's not only prediction, but also, are you even measuring the same construct across different groups? So the measurement and variance issue comes into play as well. So the point is, and we didn't answer it in this document, but we asked that question of what does it look like in the machine learning era? And those are, both measures reflecting constructs differently between groups and also measures predicting differently between groups. Those are arguably different types of bias, right? And ultimately, we think of bias, or a lot of people think of bias in terms of the outcomes, in terms of adverse impact. But there's this whole kind of system, right, of how we think about group differences that takes on different nuances in machine learning. So we tried to at least lay out a pathway to be thinking about that. And again, when we make advances in our understanding, we need to go back to the principles and revisit those foundations, because those are built on decades of insights by practitioners and researchers. Yeah.
Like speaking about like insights and ideas from researchers, like one of the most impressive things about you is just like how prolific you are as a publisher, right? Just a million different things going out there. And it gives rise, you probably have like a really unique perspective on the open science movement, what it is, what the purpose is, and how it is shaping or should shape how we publish in the future.
Much like AI, it's a fast-moving train. Open science changes over time as a function of education. So having people learn what a pre-registration is, or what's the best workflow for being transparent about what you're doing. The technologies for doing that changes over time, and the ideas of where and when to do that change over time. So for example, journal policies, Journal of Applied Psychology has started to follow open science framework guidelines. But we want to advance the quality of our work. We want to keep improving it in terms of standards, but we don't want to, we understand practical concerns. Like if organizational data are proprietary, you want to publish from it, we're not going to demand that authors share it. It's simply impossible.
Absolutely.
So it shouldn't be a mark against somebody to, who has great data, great research question, but can't share the data. That's reality. But every paper is a piece of a scientific and practice-oriented conversation, right? We can make advances. We do make advances off of multiple papers, right? Not just one. So that paper may have its limitations, but another paper will contribute. It'll have limitations, but advantages that complement the limitations of the other papers. So
I love this topic because I get involved in these conversations with different researchers that'll say, essentially they'll take a paper and just like rip it apart, like all the methods, and essentially claim that nothing from it is valid at all. Where I get it. We need rigorous methods. We need to, make sure we are as accurate as possible, but, nothing is perfect, and we can still connect the dots between different ideas. And just because one study didn't find a significant relationship and another one did, we can combine these and try to arrive at a overall truth. And it just really bothers me with the lack of ability to see, a lack of people's ability to see through this sort of mess.
Yeah, I think as an editor, as you mentioned, Cole, I'm associate editor at JP currently. It's our job to kind of see through the mess, as you put it, Scotty. Right? It's how do you connect the dots as an editor? There's sort of a saying out there that reviewers are out there to criticize papers and editors are out there to rescue them. And in some sense, that's true, that editors kind of navigate and try to see the big picture, try to cut through and say, okay, where is there a diamond in the rough? And how does this speak to larger conversations about science and practice? And right, where's the value, in other words? And how can we guide somebody's research toward productivity? And then you have to decide whether the whole idea of R&R, revise and resubmit or rejecting a paper, how do you do that in light of understanding the big picture? And there's psychometric theory or cutoffs on a test. The extremes are easy, right?
Yes.
Something definitely revise or definitely reject, but the middle is hard. And that's where we try to make better decisions. Maybe we need AI as a supplement to editorial decisions, to your previous point.
AI in addition to open science. I am curious about this just from your perspective as an editor. I'm sure you've been an editor at other journals in the past as well. There seems to be an abundance problem in the scientific literature in the sense that there's very few journals and many academics who are trying to get tenure, just trying to publish. And therefore, I imagine rather than a lot of diamonds in the rough being polished, there's probably a lot of diamonds in the rough that are never discovered because of just the pure numbers. You can only accept a certain number. And so there's many things that never make it past muster. And I think Paul Spector even wrote about this recently and something about the ethics of peer review. And so I'm wondering what's your perspective on peer review in general as a part of journals and some of the gamesmanship that seems to go on and maybe some of these diamonds in the rough that might never be discovered?
Yeah, you all are great in asking questions that have lots and lots of answers and aspects to it. So it gives me room to play. I think as a, peer reviewer, peer reviewers have different levels of insights and responsibility, right? So they think about the nature of the work, the substance, in other words, the theories that is it being informed by prior scholarship that we all know is out there? How's it doing that? And then given the context that the author should be laying out there for the reader to understand and motivate the issue, how is the paper providing an incremental contribution? So peer reviewers are looking for that. Ideally, peer reviewers have some methodological knowledge. They may, it's why you have more than one reviewer, is that they complement each other to offer different aspects.
Yeah.
But hopefully having substance is important so that whether some methods are being useful for answering the question or not. If you're pure methods, that may not be helpful. And if you're pure substance, that may not be helpful either. So you're trying to collect both sides of that. But then, to your question about science, like how much should we be publishing? That's a great question. It's one thing to look at JP or any particular journal and say, here's the accept reject rate. But what does it look like across journals? So if you look at the global, of the output that is put out, that sounds weird, output that's put out there, what parts of it are not making it that should? And by the way, what parts of it made it that shouldn't, right? And experts can disagree on how to frame that question, but it's an important one, not just in terms of those sorts of decisions, but also the timing of it. Folks have a tenure clock. When I was younger, I had a tenure clock, and so I'm very sensitive to that as well as part of this process. And that brings up other questions about how do we change the models for journals that don't disrupt careers, where there's the plan is known for those who are seeking tenure. So I think trying to figure out the routes that work for our field while carving out new routes is important. And open science, the steps we're making, I alluded to previously, is part of the answer there.
Well, I mean, like given the realities of the publishing, timelines and people needing tenure, is open science even like really feasible on a broad scale, or is it like have to be like journal specific?
Well, open science involves a wide range of practices. So my take on it, partly it's out of my ignorance out of all the options in open science, but my take on it is, well, find pieces that you see out there that are good, that are relatively easy to do, where folks see the benefit of it. So it's doable, it's rewarded, it's and raise all boats a little bit, right? Give people a taste of it. So like data sharing, to the extent you can, do it. Pre-registration, try it. Like I have not, most of my work, I have not pre-registered, but part of it is my work happened before the open science movement, but part of it's also like just getting in the habit of it. And I got to say, our graduate students really understand, they engage in open science, I would say in general, more than faculty, and know which parts more or less work for the field, right? Which parts are a little unclear, which parts don't work. So we definitely need grad students and early career researchers involved in conversations around open science. They are the future, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, are there parts of open science that don't work? I know we had sent over in preparation for the podcast this IOP article about open science closed doors by Guzo Schneider and now Bantian is, I believe, how you say it. Are there any kind of limitations or deficiencies that we should be thinking about as well?
That paper, it's been a while since I've read it. I actually was a reviewer on it. They sent it to me prior to publishing, but honestly, I'd have to remember. My general take on it was that we need a middle ground in terms of open science, in the sense that it's not like we should do everything, and it's also like it's not like we should do nothing. Open science should not be a police state kind of notion, or casting judgment.
What could be wrong with that, Fred?
As much as what would be wrong with that? You shouldn't cast. It's not an issue of casting judgment on a paper based solely on open science being used or not, because again, as I mentioned, it reflects so many different practices, and we're still learning how to implement it, that we have to figure out the reality of it for not only our field, but for particular types of research within our field, where some aspects are more possible than others. Field versus experimental research, for example, might call upon different open science practices more commonly.
Yeah, just from practical reasons. And I'll just tell you the reason why we bring it up with just about every academic we talk to, Fred, is I think the replication crisis hit us hard, and I don't really have a lot of prescriptions on the exact nitty-gritty details of what open science needs to constitute, but whatever can keep us away from our work failing to replicate is, I think, the mission that our field should really be taking to bear. But with that said, I think we might be ready for the confusion matrix. Scott, do you have any confusion matrix for us?
We have confusion matrix, and like just back to your point very quickly, like you don't need to be punished for not following open science, but definitely reward those articles that do.
Yes,
put a little
absolutely.
gold star on the top, whatever you need to do, just highlight that they are open science. But we have 5 questions for you, Fred. I know that you've done quite a bit of Big Five research, so these are loosely based on the Big Five, so you might know how to answer them accordingly.
Here we go.
Okay, so how many TV shows are you watching right now?
Not much. I gotta say, I watch whatever Beth, my wife, has on TV. I'll sit next to her and watch it. So often it's some kind of ghost hunting. She watches those things.
Yes.
She'll be upset that I mentioned that. No. No, and
I was gonna say you were low in openness to experience until you said ghost hunting. I'm like, this guy is open to experiences.
Well, they are entertaining. Those are entertaining, I will say. The news and that kind of thing. Not all that exciting, I suppose.
I like to think that you just watch everything. It's just like wildly open to experiences.
I'll watch anything you're watching. Put it that way.
That's more agreeable than us right there.
Oh, well, no. I will actually engage and understand and enjoy it too. So maybe a little of both. I actually score kind of low on agreeableness on standard Big Five tests, which I'm not quite sure why. I guess maybe I need to look at the specific items and hyperanalyze.
Oh, Fred, come to the dark side with me, Fred. Come join us. We have more fun over on the disagreeable side.
Yeah, are you disagreeable yourself?
Yeah, very much so.
Wow.
Agreed. There was that meta-analysis that showed that agreeable people have better outcomes overall in job contacts.
I like to think of disagreeableness as showing pleasant restraint, meaning that you have boundaries, like everybody should have reasonable boundaries, but it doesn't mean you snap at people or disrespect their boundaries.
Okay, question 2. Do you time box your task, or do you go to your absolutely finished?
I'm not hyper organized about tasks. I try to get things done in slivers, like we're all in the Zoom world, right? In between meetings, in between things I'm doing here at home, I sit down and try and do some stuff. What I don't want to do, and sometimes the strategy leads to first in, what is it? First in, first out, last in, first out.
Yes.
No, it's last in, first out is the suboptimal strategy. You put out the fire you see first. So I try not to do that, but try to semi-organize what's going on and then tackle that in between podcasts.
Here's a controversial engagement item. Do you have a best friend in the office?
My best friend is the entire Department of Psychological Sciences at Rice.
I love it.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Well done.
We have a great group. I've been in multiple psych departments, and I've got to say we are a very collegial group, but not just, legitimately supportive, not just smiling faces, but actually helping each other, looking out for our early career researchers. We have a great group, so I look forward to driving to work every day. Occasionally driving to work, I have thought about people driving slow, where rather than being disagreeable, I think about how, some folks don't look forward to going to work. Maybe that's why they're driving slow, or everyone has their own story in the car, right?
I like that. Agreeableness. Do you try to see the good in everyone's ideas or just dismiss them offhand?
Only in graduate students. No. I do look forward. I do look for the good ideas in everyone. I mean, if you're like me, your ideas don't always come out perfectly. And so I think part of the conversation with people is trying to get at the real good stuff of what we're trying to do. And sometimes we don't know what it is until we talk about it a little more, until we're informed by each other. Like my ideas change. I hope yours, everyone's does, as a function of conversation. So try and work toward, material things. And you might, I think part of that skill is continue to engage when you disagree with somebody on their ideas.
I think that's the innovation process, right? Just collaborating, iterating on people's ideas, etc. Do you get anxious when you're running late?
Yes, very. Yes, even over time, I get more anxious about that. I tend not to run late, but if I do, I'm not liking that very much.
We have one write-in question. So I asked a tenured IO. I was like, I'm going to be talking to Fred Oswald. Like, what should I ask him? And she said, well, he probably lives in Rice Village or somewhere near there. What's his favorite Mexican restaurant in Houston?
Oh, wow. Okay. There's an easy answer to that. But I live, I actually, for those familiar with Houston, or I don't know if you want to look me up and get on the satellite photo to see where I live. But I am.
Let's not do that, please.
Yeah. I'm on the west side of Houston, the Galleria area, just outside the Galleria. So I'm about 20 minutes to Rice, straight shot. It's very challenging to drive as anyone in Houston will attest, to drive on the highways in the morning during rush hour. Your head is on a pivot, and your blinker is not a request. You're telling people where you're going. So it's pretty challenging. But back to Mexican food, El Tiempo, I'll put a plug in for El Tiempo Cantina. Many locations, one near you, and margaritas are quite delightful.
There you go. El Tiempo.
Well, I had to put you on the spot, Fred. I did come down and you stood me up, buddy.
Oh,
no. What the heck, man?
Oh, that was, well, in my own defense, I had a unavoidable conflict. But you keep holding your people analytics meetings, and I will certainly show up.
Fred had to go to El Tiempo. I mean,
yeah, I had to go to El Tiempo. No, I think I actually had a family thing going on then, but it was not personal. Trust me.
I should have baited him with margaritas. I should have known.
Right.
Well, Fred, do you want to join us in the nerdery?
Sure, please explain, but I'll say yes even before.
There you go.
Open to experience. Sure.
Well, let's start out just, I guess, because it's kind of in the vein of what we were talking about earlier on AI is, and I'm not sure if the decision has been made or not, but there's this New York City law on making employee-based decisions using algorithms. And it's been debated for quite a while. I'm not sure, again, if it's actually been passed now, but it's got some pretty stringent, you might even argue arcane requirements for using data to make decisions that I would say is somewhat in conflict with you've mentioned multiple times, Fred, our principles and our uniform guidelines in terms of, they're almost to the point of making it illegal to do any kind of calculation to make employee-based decisions. Have you guys seen this and what's going on here? And I'll put a link in the show notes for what's being debated currently.
Yeah, I've actually been involved in the public hearings they have on the law. So I've been to a couple of those. And the reason there's been a couple of those is because they've been so well attended and there's been so much feedback from the community, IO psychology included, whether it's academics or test vendors, practitioners, et cetera. So also just folks from really all walks of life around the ethics of AI. For example, I know a couple of folks, there who've submitted comments and so on. So lots of interest, lots of revisions. It would be hard to characterize the law in its entirety here on the spot, but I would say that some of the points I think you're highlighting, Cole, are correct. Like, it remains to be seen how what entails automated employment decision tool, right? So, I think if reading the law, it looks like if you, so long as the algorithm is not making the decision, the human is in the loop, so to speak, to make decisions, then it's not an automated employment tool. So like if you're relying on the output from the algorithm solely, like, hire this person or don't hire this person, that would definitely be a problem. But there's also some gray area where, it sounds objective, but it's actually trickier than it sounds, where the law says, if you use the output from an automated tool, and it's one of a set of other kinds of pieces of information you're using, so that automated piece is not weighted more than the others, you're in the clear. Well, weights are a complicated thing if you're a math person, because there are implicit weights and explicit weights. So you might say, hey, this is 3 times more important than that, or 4 times, give relative weights to like 5 different things. And you're giving those weights, and you can actually weight the variables that way. The problem is, lurking underneath the variables are correlations and standard deviations. And they have weight, they affect the weights. And so I've scratched my head over that in the past and about that issue, published on it. But it is a real issue. So, how will that be resolved? Will it be through case law? Will it be through more proactive examples provided by the city? Who knows? So I think the weighting issue is problematic. I think another issue is, when a vendor is just starting to use a measure and they don't have local data, and there's a provision to be able to rely on vendor data. It's like, well, how do you, what types of data should you rely on? And is it really generalizable if they have different selection ratios or different industry? I'd need to read the law more carefully. They may have revised that point to some extent, but I think it's definitely an issue as to how employers are going to be complying with the law when they're lacking historical data, and they ask the vendor to provide it, and those being able to bridge the gap between the vendor data and your local situation is of concern. Finally, just one more issue comes to play is the statistical accuracy issue. So you can say there's an adverse impact ratio, but how accurate is it? What sample size is associated with it? How do you interpret that? We've always struggled with that issue in our literature, and now it's coming into this law.
Yeah, I think a smart man once said, you can tell it's broken by the way that it is. And you kind of see that in this scenario where it's like there's so much ambiguity that you bring up, and it's just not well devised and not well communicated. So hopefully it'll get resolved in a way that, obviously you want to protect people's rights and, protect their privacy and data. But the way it originally came out or publicized, it just felt like so overarching and not specific enough, definitely.
Everyone's trying to figure it out, and these laws are coming up everywhere, right? So
California,
New Jersey,
GDPR,
New Jersey, New York, Illinois already has some laws in place. California had a law proposed. I'm not sure, maybe it's been passed. So lots of laws coming up, and they're looking at each other, right? They're looking at the New York law for some guidance, and so on. So we'll see how this keeps developing.
Can I make one last kind of practical point on it? I think Scott even started the podcast out with this. Like, one of our findings from science is that mechanized decision making oftentimes trumps, human decision making. And then what's going on here seems like human decision making, like at least the premise behind it, from what I gather, is like human decision making is superior decision making. And I'm like, you guys have never met many humans, have you? Because like the decision making of humans is often poor, and we could probably use some data to get involved in this.
Well, then you like revert to things like nepotism and just I like the cut of your jib sort of.
Why don't we go back to the feudal system while we're at it? What could go wrong? Like, I mean, these are silly things.
We need a break. So the second nerdery topic: how long of a break do we really need? And what should we do during this break to regain our fatigue? It's a really pretty interesting study. So it's a experimental study. They asked people to complete a task requiring vigilance. So it's changes in computer screen sort of things, and like respond to keyboard. So not too dissimilar to writing a doc or like sending emails and sort of thing. And then they manipulated the break condition. So one group, they had them watch a funny video. Another group, they had them watch a meditation video. Sounds boring as hell. And third group, they said, perform a similar but different task. And they also manipulated the break length. So either 1, 5, or 9 minutes for each of these conditions. Overall, all break conditions had at least a small replenishment effect. That's pretty cool. A funny video clip, no matter its duration, 1, 5, or 9 minutes, reported much lower fatigue. Participants whose break consisted of performing a different but similar task for 1 minute also fully recovered. That sounds implausible, but okay, whatever. They also reported lower levels of fatigue, and overall, short breaks are one effective way of improving feeling, energy, and replenishing feelings of energy and attention at work. Interesting.
Very interesting.
So get your TikTok out, watch some funny videos on TikTok.
Right. Will it mean that employers will tell employees to make their breaks shorter? Take a micro break.
The negative side. I love it.
Yeah.
It's like you just need 1 minute.
He is disagreeable. Yeah.
I love it.
I think there's a happy medium here for the right type of break. And of course, delves in the detail of what type of tasks are we talking about on the job. Type of break would be interesting to manipulate, right? What kinds of things are you, there's an exercise or take a walk break. There's a stare out of the window break. There's listen to music break.
When I want to make a comment, Scott, you talked about the meditation one. Have you ever heard of the Calm app?
Yes. It's just like a collection of these sort of like ASMR sort of things. And they have a series of those videos on HBO, and I was like, what is this? I put it on. I'm telling you, it might be the most relaxing thing on earth. I was like, we watched it with my children. My children even calmed down. I was like, what are they putting, like sedatives into this? Like, geez, this is the best thing. I've been through it, like, because I think they have like something like 8 videos. They're not that long, and we've been through the cycle multiple times at our house because it's just so dang calming. It's subliminal psyops right through the TV, right to your brain.
Exactly.
Pretty interesting. Yeah, I think, and to your point, like, can apps help us out as options for easy access to breaks that are designed for us? I think that's, in the age of AI, we talk more about personalization. So maybe these apps will figure out the break that's right for you in terms of length and type and so on. So that research sounds pretty interesting.
We kind of touched on it earlier. Like I know you obviously a prolific reader as well, Fred. I'm seeing like conflicting results on like the value of well-being in the office, like whether it has any effect or whether it's great for personnel. Have you seen anything that like shift your opinion one way or the other on what well-being sort of initiatives are doing?
Yeah, this is a little bit out of my area, but I have seen enough work through editing to know that well-being research is certainly alive and well in thinking about it, whether it's from a experience sampling method perspective. So like let's get more in-depth data on how people are feeling over time, and are there cyclical effects or are there network effects based on who you're dealing with and what you're doing. So I think digging into those processes is really helpful because they more closely reflect the reality of work, and probably get at ties between well-being and productivity that we may not have seen otherwise. Also, I think well-being interventions are still alive and well, certainly in the educational literature where you're thinking about a child's self-efficacy and self-esteem, and both of those are boosted by well-being, and certainly true in the workplace as well. And where you derive your well-being is kind of expands your scope on what to whether it's taking a break, right, that could make you feel better, but also your social interactions, getting a task done well can boost your well-being in terms of the accomplishment and feedback and contribution you're making to the organization. So lots of ways to look at a important topic there.
There's a really good point that there are many ways to function your well-being, and like the social aspects of the job are a major component, but it's not necessarily thought of as a well-being sort of tool, as it were.
I had a flashback there for a minute there to when I worked at Walmart in high school, that my well-being on the job there was totally dependent on Billy working with me in the electronics section of the store.
Positive or negative?
Positive.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we had a great time. We had a great time, but also I think we did a reasonable job. Maybe I'd do it better today, but we were kids. But that keeps you going, right? It relates to your performance. It relates to turnover in some pretty direct ways, maybe ways we don't research as much as we could.
You had a best friend at the office. There you go.
How crazy would it be if we were like, and we've got Billy here to join us on the podcast?
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
We'll hunt him down later.
Well, what if Billy was not, I don't know if he was or wasn't, but what if he was not a good performer and yet stimulated others' performance? Maybe that's a function.
Organizational citizenship behaviors,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
They're not necessarily performance. It's outside of performance.
I've talked about this in the past, but there's like a bit of teams research or social network analysis research that I want to perform around like this idea of a glue member. Not necessarily the best performer, not necessarily the energy person, but the guy that holds everything together and like increases everyone's performance. If they were to go away, the team would fall apart.
Exactly.
This is probably a negative connotation, but when I worked in startups, they would sometimes call those people the mascot. They're not necessarily the high performer, but they hold the whole company rallies around them.
I like that.
I think they're underappreciated as a mascot, I would say, right? Because like you said, the whole thing could fall apart, or your morale goes away, or even your performance goes away if that person who's the glue creates basically social transmission of what people are doing in a group of people.
Absolutely. Like if there's like intergroup conflict, you got someone to kind of mediate that, or kind of buffer activities or what have you.
For sure.
I used to work with a guy that played on the Cubs, and he essentially said that all the major league teams are essentially equal in talent, but you have certain like sort of team dynamics or culture that really sets it off, and maybe they got these sort of folks there.
The MLB just needs more glue guys, Scott.
More glue guys.
Glue guys. Well, managers can be glue as well. So like, I remember in 2007, I did my sabbatical with the personnel selection area of the Navy. Went into work every day, 9 to 5, very non-academic kind of rigid schedule. Go in and Andy Jones, the Navy contact I had there, he figured out, how everyone contributed, whether it was my work or I shared with you earlier before the podcast, I play Scrabble. He's like, he picked up on that. He's like, hey, you play Scrabble. We need to create an abbreviation for this project. So we got on the whiteboard and did that, but that's just one example, a more humorous one of how he figured out what everyone had to offer in a group. So he really was a very effective glue as a manager.
Well, I got a question about this. How does one become good at Scrabble? Like, I'm not good at Scrabble. I've never been good. And people, I think, is there like Words with Friends or something was really popular there a few years ago too. How do you become really good at Scrabble?
Thank you so much for humoring me, Cole. You play a lot of games. That's one way to do it. And you see what other people are playing and learn. So that's a fun way to do it. It's not as direct, but you climb the learning curve. Another way to do it is brute force. You just learn a bunch of words that you may not even know the definitions, right? Some of the best players are not even English speakers, yet they're playing English Scrabble. So that's brute force. And for me, it was, these days, it's certainly just playing games now and then, but it's a little of both. It's like, okay, I got to know all my, 2 and 3 letter words or whatever. And as the glue for Scrabble. And then it's a thing. There's you take anything, right? You all probably have favorite hobbies where you have a group of people that affiliate with you. And I gotta say, the group that plays Scrabble is a very quirky group, and I guess I have to count myself among them. And it's interesting. I haven't played in the Houston club for a while, years, but there is a club here waiting for me.
XI feels like cheating, right? I don't even know what word that is, but I know it'll score.
Oh, XI, yeah, Greek letter. No, that's in maybe Lizerl uses it.
Yeah, well, I think we always call that Xi or whatever in graduate school. Yeah,
Xi, okay.
These things are unknowable, Fred.
They're literally unknown. They were carved on tablets, and we're trying to figure it out today.
Exactly. Well, I think we had one more nerdy topic, which I guess the irony is striking me now that we're talking to a college professor and we're bringing this up. But was the popularity of college it seems like in the last few years, this is from the Wall Street Journal reports that 56% of Americans now say getting a 4-year college degree isn't worth the cost, which is up from 40% a decade ago, in terms of opinions changing, that is a stark contrast. I don't know, Scott, any thoughts here on why you think this is? I don't know if it's so much as the value of the college degree has gone down. I'm not really sure that's the part of the equation. It's just the cost of the college degree seems like it's gone up so much. And is it the push for, I know a lot of employers are talking about moving the 4-year degree as a employment requirement and things like that. What's your perspective on this?
Well, clearly the costs have gone so astronomical that people don't want to be in debt, for 10, 20 years following college. I totally get that. I'd love to hear Fred's perspective on this, being a college professor. But the internet has also democratized a lot of sort of skills. Like you can go out and get data science skills for free from Google, or some of these other, MIT offers free courses as well, where without the need to take British literature, which from a culture perspective, from a liberal arts perspective, is very valuable. You can speak well at dinner parties and this sort of thing. But
yeah, we might be able to know what Xi is if we had a better humanities education.
I'm glad y'all do. But it is striking, and it seems like there's a proliferation of majors that are not related to money making. So like things like engineering or like advanced degrees in psychology, obviously we can attest that there is a market for you, especially based on research skills, et cetera. But there's also a lot of things that just don't translate into a livable wage. So I think people are shying away from that.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be my thoughts anyway, uninformed thoughts.
No, that sounds right. I mean, the educational landscape is changing in many ways. And I think answering this question in part would be usefully informed by people who've gone through non-traditional pathways. So those folks who have gone online to get specific training in, coding, computer programming, or maybe technical skills, learning electrical or plumbing. Maybe you can learn your skills that way. There still might be certification issues to get through that are standard no matter what pathway you took. But learning more about those options, I think, is very informative. I think there's an issue of kind of a broad brush distinction between the proliferation of ways you can get educated and the number of people that are going down those pathways, right? So we know even if people in polls say that they don't think traditional method is necessary for education, that doesn't mean they're going those non-traditional routes. So what do those actually look like? Who's taking the leap and who's not? And it might divide along different lines. Could be, demographic differences, SES differences. I would certainly think, that there are cheaper options to get to where you want to go in terms of your next career step. And, as it'll vary by industry, I suppose, but, some pathways will get more clearly defined than others as far as how you follow a non-traditional route. Like maybe for Python coding, for example, folks say who have already done it, right? So you can get this informal advice from peers who have already done it and say, look, just go to this site, you'll get trained. It's 12 hours a day for 6 weeks or something, but then you get this certification and I got a job here and you can get a job there. And, those types of things are already coming out naturally.
AI and generative AI is a big disruptor as well. So like if I had a kid going into college next year and they're like, I want to be a copywriter, I'd be like, hell no.
Right.
Well, I kind of want to ask you about that, Fred, because when I've been speaking publicly recently, I've gotten this question or some kind of variation of this question quite often, which is like, it's a parent who says, my kid's in college or my kid's about to be in college. What should I tell them to study so that this wave of AI, they come out the other side on top? And, and one of my variants of the answer is I say, well, eventually I think AI is going to be college. But until then, I don't know. I mean, maybe computer science, maybe it's the humanities because critical thinking is going to become that much more important. But what is your perspective on this, Fred?
Your last point really resonates with me, which is because technology is becoming so disruptive. A year ago, we were not talking about ChatGPT, right? Now it's all over the place. We're really thinking about what it's going to do. And in fact, people are doing it, right? We know people are out there advancing their work career, or at the very least, writing emails more easily using ChatGPT. So how is that rearranging people's skills, rearranging their time? They have maybe more time free. And what do they do in that new world, not just for themselves, but for the people they're interacting with who are also using these technologies? So for education, it's not quite clear whether you're a student or a professor. I've been tracking this guy, Ethan Mollick. You know him, Scotty?
Oh yeah, we borrow from him constantly.
Okay.
Borrow is such a generous word. We plagiarize him constantly.
Might be nice to have on your podcast, but
he's coming.
He's coming. Okay,
yeah.
I didn't get paid to say that, y'all. But he would be, he's offered excellent insights about education, and I haven't read for detail, but he seems to embrace as an instructor himself the use of GPT, having students do it, try it out, see how it works for them and how it doesn't, and be transparent about its use. I think there's a place, kind of like using calculators or any other technology. There's a place for using it, and there's a place where you shouldn't use it. And we're trying to figure that out. And so, Cole, your point about critical thinking, critical thinking will not go away as AI turns up. In fact, it'll be perhaps more important, maybe in different ways. But AI will maybe place a higher premium on at least certain types of critical thinking. And so, I think one area that's more or less obvious is the bias issue, that AI might be biased, but the fact that it can detect the bias and doesn't ignore, but actually detects it, that means that humans can look at that and say, okay, like to the extent we get to, this is part of the issue with AI too. I'm a little too glib here, but once we can get under the hood of AI, get to interpretable AI and say, look, here are the sources of bias, or potential sources of bias, that's where our critical thinking skills come in and say, well, how do we intervene? How do we mitigate bias? How do we intervene on it, prevent it?
So what I hear you saying, Fred, is we all need to be prompt engineers and AI algorithm editors or auditors,
But perhaps that couldn't hurt in some jobs. Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's going to be a skill of the future, just like being able to Google things very well, or perhaps we'll all just go to like sort of like manual careers too, like electrician or plumber. You alluded to earlier, just a different sort of path.
Yeah, it is. The skill of generating prompts yourself, or like being a prompt engineer, where you work with people that know how to probe the system in ways that help out work. So that could be a valuable teammate. Maybe AI will be prompt engineers as well, so that it'll ask itself its own questions.
Boy, like going back to Ethan Mollick just real quick, we covered one of his posts some time ago where he essentially loaded a data set into generative AI and said, find me unique relationships that haven't been explored before, and write a 7-page research synopsis of it. And by God, it wrote the intro, methods,
I saw that,
results, etc. Amazing stuff.
It was very impressive. There are ways that that could be polished up a little bit, but most of it was there, right? And so I think that's the point. Is I think even as we move to the next GPT 4 or 5 or and so on, that yes, it'll get better. The question then is it producing what you want? I actually think in some ways personality might come more into play in those domains. Personality combined with practical constraints. And by what I mean by that is you need to get something done. GPT does it well in a certain way that'll be acceptable to whoever you give it to. But then the question of whether it's acceptable in the way you would like may almost be a personality question. It's a matter of style.
It's funny you bring this up, because I had this exact conversation with Cole over the weekend. I was saying, like, I got ChatGPT to write me a couple of paragraphs. I took my paragraphs, I put it in there, said, here, edit it down, kind of change it up a little bit, smarten it up because I'm not a smart guy, these sort of things. And then I got it back and I spent just as long trying to rewrite what it wrote that it took to get back to the original draft, essentially.
ChatGPT, the new time waster of 2023.
That's right.
This OpenAI's next commercial. Anyway, with that said, I think we've officially gone off the rails in the podcast. So this is usually where we wrap things up, Fred. They say never meet your heroes. So thank goodness you're not one of my heroes, Fred. I'm kidding.
Thank goodness.
That was a terrible joke.
The
anyway, I actually
mutual, Cole.
No. Fred, if you knew how much I had looked up to your research, you would know how much of a joke that was. So thank you so much for what you do.
Same thing. I remember.
Whatever.
Well, I remember you from the plane. Ever since then.
Just this twinkle in my eye struck you the right way, right?
There you go. No, y'all have been great. I really have enjoyed this podcast, and thanks for having me. And I will become an avid listener from here on out. It's just been, y'all are very talented at what you do, and thanks for entertaining me, but more importantly, keeping our audience engaged. So thank you.
Thanks for coming on, Fred. Super appreciate it.
Take care, y'all.
You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott and Dr. Fred Oswald, my hero. Thank you for joining us, Fred.
Hey, thanks a lot again.
As always, all opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
You've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott.